Welcome to The Whole Picture, where we talk to your favorite entrepreneurs and talk about their deep interests and hobbies and passions, the things that keep them in the long game. Today, we are here with Kaeli Sweigard, who is an online business consultant for coaches. She is someone who I have worked with on several projects and is generally an amazing, amazing human. So I'm super pumped to have her here. Hey, thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for saying I'm a super nice human. Thank you.
One of the nicest. I think even when we were like not working together, have had all kinds of Instagram conversations back and forth about we used to live in Florida and we had like
Yeah.
gators, and you are in like the exact opposite in Canada, like just deep feet of snow. So we always had fun like back and forths about that.
I know, but now that you're not in Florida, where am I going to get my gator fix
I
anymore?
don't know. As Steven was leaving today, he was like, "Tell her we can send her pictures of subway rats. That's our wildlife now."
Tell them I'm waiting to see that.
It really is a fun city. Yes.
Well,
Okay,
thank you for
Kaeli.
having me.
So I, when I was starting this, you were one of the first people who came to mind because you, when we first met, your Instagram was all about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I knew that you were this amazing online business ninja. And then I saw that and I was like, that is like a completely different side of you that like we had never taught, it had never come up during our workings together. So take me back to the beginning. Like, where did the first interest in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu start?
I mean, it's not sexy, but I just really always liked watching UFC.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was really interesting. And some people think it looks kind of, I don't know, brutal, but they call boxing the sweet science. And I just could see that even if it looks not super technical, it is. And I just really wanted to learn more about it. And so it was terrifying, but one day I just walked into a dojo and tried a class.
So you saw something that was cool and
Yeah.
like looked like something that you would, and you made the decision to sign up and go into a gym, which
Yeah.
that in itself is something that the majority of people don't do. Because
Yeah.
often we see like, oh, acting looks cool, or oh, this thing looks cool. And then it's like something in the back of our mind that we file away. Like I've always wanted to try, you know?
Mhm.
But you did. So tell
Yeah.
me, like, is that something that's consistent for you? Like when you want to try something, you sign up, or like how did that go for you?
I mean, I was terrified. Like, let's be real. I was so scared. I mean, it's terrifying. Like, if you don't know how to fight and you're like, I'm literally just gonna go to this building that I've never been to before to go try to fight a bunch of people I've never met when I don't know what I'm doing. Like, that is terrifying. I was like, my anxiety levels were so high, but in my mind, I'm like, you know what? What is the worst that's gonna happen? Um, in all likelihood, I will live to see another day. So I'm like, I would rather, this might sound gruesome, but I've always been very aware of the fact that like we're here for a finite amount of time. And I'm like, as far as I know, this is the one life I get. So I'm like, I might as well give it a shot. Maybe it goes horribly, and what happens? Okay, then I'll have a funny story to tell. Um, so that is one of the things that is drilled into your head though when you start jujitsu is leave your ego at the door. Like, and some schools will literally have this like written on the walls, like leave your ego at the door, because if you are not willing to try something new with an almost guaranteed rate of failure, right? Like if you are not willing to do that, you literally can't do the sport. And so you have to have that attitude of like, I'm willing to fail publicly. I'm willing to be super awful at something. If there's a chance that I can get 1% better every time I'm there, right? They say there is no bad day of training on the mats. Even, I'm not super still to this. I've been doing jujitsu for years. I'm still not great at it. But as long as you're there learning, it's a good day. So, yeah. So I just that attitude of like, of being willing to learn something super, super, super hard. If you can do that, you're golden. You don't lose.
Is that something that you like, that mentality, is that something that you learned as you were going through this, or is that something that stems back to like before Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
I would say it's very much part of the jiu-jitsu culture actually, which is really cool. Like, it's not just the sport, like the doing of the activity, but there is a whole culture around it, which is really, really cool. One of the main things you learn when you start is you either win or you learn. There is no failure. You either win or you learn. And that is required, again, to step on the mats. Because think about it, when you step on the mats, there's a 99% chance that in any given, match or fight, whatever you want to call it, you're going to lose. Especially if you don't know what you're doing. Like there's a 99% chance you're going to lose. And so uh, it's part of the culture that is drilled into you. Like everybody on the mat, here's the thing, everybody on the mats knows more than you do. They all know you're going to fail, but that's okay. They don't make fun of you for it. It's there as like a family, a community. And so they will literally tell you, like, you either win or you learn. They want to coach you. They want to help you. It's part of that culture of martial arts. It is very hierarchical, but the beauty of that is, okay, so you're the new guy, but guess what? Everybody who's been there longer, they have been taught that part of their responsibility as somebody who's ahead of you is to take care of you. So a lot of people go in thinking, oh no, the higher belts are gonna, whip my butt. Like literally my first jujitsu class ever, I was training with guys who were in the UFC. I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know. I just showed up and I'm like, this is a beginner's class, right? And the owner of the school was like, oh, no, 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 you're going to be rolling with UFC guys tonight. And I'm like, what? I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know. Clearly, I didn't even know what class I was going to. So literally my first time doing it, I was rolling with UFC guys. But and in your mind, if you're new, you're terrified. You're like, they're going to kick my butt. But what's really cool is you learn very quickly, no, those are actually the safest people, the people who've been doing this the longest. They're the most skilled. They're actually the safest people to be rolling with because they know what to do. They know what not to do. It's the new guys that you need to be really worried about. It's the new people who don't know how to control their bodies, who probably do have more of that ego that they need to shed. That's when you need to be a little more concerned. Anyway, so.
Yeah. It's such an interesting perspective, what you just
Yeah.
said, because we do feel like often in any scenario, like, that it's intimidating to be placed against someone who's at like a higher position than you. Like as you're talking, I'm thinking about the acting world. You are ranked on your call sheet, which is like who's there that day. There's a 1 and a 2, and those are like the leads. And there are leads who are kind of have more of an ego and like have a certain way of acting on a set. And then there are leads who see that number 1 spot on the call sheet as like, I'm responsible for the tone of the set, and I'm responsible for, and they have all of this experience and either can use it to be, a certain kind of way, or they can use it to like, hey, the extras are in a tent outside and it's freezing. Like, let's do something about that. So it's like they have that awareness. And that's a really, really unique thing because you can feel very intimidated by that, or you can be like, they actually know what they're talking about because they've been around.
Yeah.
Was it ever like, so you started that initial class and then you were right away rolling around with people who were like professional fighters.
Yeah.
And so like, tell me about class number 2. Were you like, I'm going to go back, I'm so excited? Did you ever hit like a plateau where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to keep doing this?
Oh yeah, plateaus. Oh my God, like every day you're like, why am I doing this? I'm awful. Like, what am I? But I found the key was connecting with, and generally everybody's pretty good. Like everybody's been there before. They know how hard it is. So most people are generally supportive, but there are some people who might coach you a little bit more. You might just bond with some people. So I just found it really was those one-on-one personal connections of like the people who will take you aside and spend some extra time coaching you and just I don't know, the positive community, those individual connections really, really helped and Yeah, falling in love with just sucking, just falling in love with the process. Because you're like, you know what? Again, you either win or you learn. Like, okay, what did I learn today? Like, if you can just walk away from the mat, like a lot of people in jiu-jitsu will have a training journal, and literally at the end of a class, they will write down in their journal, like, okay, what did I fail at today? What did I learn? What can I do better next time? Um, so it is just falling in love with the process of learning. You have to, because you're gonna like, again, I'm still like, I'm not, if you're listening to audio right now, I'm holding up my arms. They're not super muscular. Like I'm not a super strong person. I'm not super athletic. Almost all of my jiu-jitsu injuries have been self-inflicted by accident when I tripped, right? Like I'm not naturally great at this, but um, just falling in love with the process. That's it. That is it.
Is that mentality, falling in love with the process, or like learning to love learning, is
Yeah.
that something that comes naturally to you? Is that something that you've always had as a value?
Yes, I would say in is it Clifton you know the Clifton Strengths test? My
Hmm.
number one skill is learning. And actually before that test, I didn't even know that learning was considered a skill, like something you could be good at or not. I just thought it was something you did. Um, but yeah, learning is my number one skill. Uh, but I would say it's really interesting to me because you and I both work in online business with coaches, and I would say, like, I've put a lot of thought into what makes some people quote unquote successful and some people not. And I can find an exception to everything. So I'm like, I'm not even sure if it's, some people are super clear on the customer journey. Some people who I've seen be really successful are not super clear on the customer journey. Some people are super perfectionist, some people are not. So I'm like, what is that common thread then? And I really think it's self-awareness. I really think it's self-awareness and a focus on how they are connected in their community. Like, what does their business mean to the, like, is their business really about them or is it about their community? And I just find it's the people who are most self-aware and can work in a way that works for them. Those are the people who are successful. Because I see people who want it so bad, but they're not self-aware. And so it's just not working for them. It's just not.
Do you find like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of forces you to be self-aware because like you
Yeah.
were in a position and now you're aware of that
Yeah.
position?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And what's really interesting too, actually, is it also is super interesting to see how you work with coaches. So like on the mats, like you'll have a coach and there are different kinds of coaches. And it's interesting to see them learn how to coach you. Like there's some people in jiu-jitsu who respond really well to being yelled at. In the middle of a match, like some people respond really well to their coach being like, just yelling at them to do something different or whatever. I am not that. That is not how to coach me, and my coaches learn that very quickly. Like, oh, if you yell at Kaeli, she's gonna freeze and it's just not gonna go well. So they know, okay, so the way to coach Kaeli is after the match, after the roll, then we can do like a play-by-play. And so even like I didn't know that about myself until I was on the mats, right? So self-awareness in terms of, okay, how do I learn best? But yeah, self-awareness in terms of okay, what am I naturally really good at? Especially, okay, being a lighter person, there's a certain way that I need to do jujitsu that is different than like a larger, naturally very strong person. That's a totally different game we're gonna play. Um, yeah, so you learn a lot about yourself.
Is that so though that was like a new realization for you? So did you do sports in high school or like in college or anything like that? So you weren't in kind of like the athletic world until like what at what age if
Yeah.
did you start doing this
That
Brazilian?
was like mid to late 20s, I would say. Yeah.
And was there anything like were you like just wanting to like you saw it and you're like, okay, this is like that looks like a cool thing to learn. And that was a through line for you. You like had found that you liked
Yeah.
learning. You just didn't know that that was like a skill yet. So that was a through line for you. And so you picked that. Like, tell me about that because that's a tough
Yeah.
thing to do rather than like there's a lot of things you can learn. you know, like
Yeah.
there's a lot of other things that are not as like physically demanding. So were you
Hmm.
wanting to like also physically challenge yourself, or was it just about the learning?
Well, it is about, because as I've mentioned before, I've always been very aware of like our mortality. And I always think about, okay, when I'm like 90, I would like to be able to walk around without a walker. I've always been very, very aware of like, okay, what am I doing now that's going to affect elderly version of me? And so I hate working out. I actually hate exercise. So, oh, I hate it. I hate it so much. And again, but that's part of the self-awareness. Like I know myself well enough that I've stopped trying to force myself to like it. I'm like, I just don't enjoy it. So part of the jujitsu thing for me was like, I just need to find something that I don't hate that allows me to get exercise. I'm like, okay, again, self-awareness. I'm like, I am a very intellectual person. I need my brain to be occupied. So I can't just like be alone lifting weights in the gym because it drives me crazy. But if I have another person, if I do a social activity, which jujitsu, it requires at least one other person to train with, right? It's like, okay, if I do something social, I can tolerate this exercise because I will do, one of my values is physical health. So it's a non-negotiable for me. I'm going to do exercise, but I got to do it in a way that actually works for me. Um, yeah, so jujitsu is cool because it allows you to be social. Oh, that was my, I wish it was sexier than that, but that was my reasoning.
That's so interesting because the self-awareness then, like, that's a through line for you also. Like,
Yeah.
where do you remember a point like in your life where you were like, I notice things about myself more because I've had this feedback also that I have this like awareness. Did you like where did you notice that in your life that you have this self-awareness?
Honestly, I think it's just being in community and having, I guess, people reflect back to me. Like I've not been, I wouldn't say I'm naturally a very self-aware person, but for example, I went to school for naturopathic medicine. And so I was with a lot of like hippy dippy people. And so like a lot of yoga teachers were my classmates. And I remember, I think we had like a really, really stressful exam period. And that was always like super high anxiety time for me. I did not do well with exam stress, like really not a good time. And I remember one of my classmates, who's a yoga teacher, came up to me in the hall one day. We must have been talking about the exam stress or something. And she said to me, well, Kaeli, how does it feel in your body? And I didn't understand the question. I was literally like, what do you mean? Like, nobody had ever asked me that. I was almost like, I have a body? Like, what? Like, I didn't understand the question. I'm like, what do you mean? How does it feel in my body? And then from there, I started to get really curious, like, what did she mean? Nobody had ever asked me that before. And so that year, I started experimenting with like free yoga classes on YouTube. And uh, so yeah, just to say, like, I would not say I'm naturally a very self-aware person, but I think it's really cool to be in community with different kinds of people who can maybe reflect back to you or ask you inquiring questions. Um, yeah, because I had no idea how to answer that question. How does it feel in your body? I would not say I'm a very, yeah, necessarily physically aware person.
And when she asked you that, it was like what you said is like I didn't even know I had a body. Like
Yeah.
I relate to that so much because there's an our brain, like especially people who work in business now, like our brains are engaged 100% of the time.
Mhm.
And I do forget to like I have to shift positions sometimes or like get up and walk around. I'm so up here.
Mhm.
And so did you in that like journey, did you recognize like since learning is one of your superpowers, like did you recognize like I have to learn this skill or was it like did it kind of naturally follow after you started like one yoga class that like you felt better?
I would say I'm still not like if somebody were to right now ask me, how does it feel in your body right now, or how do you, what are you feeling? I'd be like, I really would have a tough time answering that because I'm just not one of those people who can naturally my brain just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. What I would say is, oh, I'm so sorry, I forget the question.
Just basically like,
Did it,
is it something that you made the conscious decision like to do, or did it evolve naturally?
um, I still, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna be really honest with you. No, like for real, for real, for real. And so I don't know how this might affect the direction we go, but one of my core values is honesty. So I'm autistic. Uh, so I just don't, when people ask me like, okay, how does something feel in your body? My brain literally does not work that way. I'm just a very intellectual person. So in terms of sensory things, I just relate to it. Just I'm just wired differently than a lot of people. And so I do have to take time to really think about, okay, what do I want right now? And so that's actually, I think, some of the beauty of coaching. Again, like being in community with people. I used to work with a really high level coach, and the core of everything that she would always bring us back to, no matter what we were, no matter what the challenge was that we were encountering, she would always ask, what do you want? And it seems like such an obvious, simple question, but that one question, I don't want to say that one question will solve your life, but I have yet to encounter a scenario where asking, what do I want, doesn't work, right? Like, so that question is beautiful. So even if I can't answer the question of like, what am I feeling? What is the right thing to do? Asking, what do I want? And trusting yourself. Um, yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Yeah.
I've found that really, really helpful.
It is very helpful because we often do things by default. And that is like, I don't know your college experience, but mine was just, I fell face first into it because I was told, like, you're supposed to do this, and then you're supposed
Mhm.
to do this. And it wasn't until I had, tens of thousands of dollars in college debt and was sitting at a desk that I hated that I
Mhm.
was like, wait, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Because
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
can't be it. Like,
Yeah.
and we kind of forget that we have free will sometimes, like
Mhm.
that we can just do, we're blessed and lucky and privileged enough to have to be in a place where we can make decisions for ourselves. And we don't often because it's like this, just this default thing. Something that you mentioned just recently was one of your core values. You just said one of my
Mhm.
core values is honesty. Tell me about that. Like, did you spend time developing your core values as a coach or as a person? And like, what was that journey?
I've always just been super, I just even in high school, teachers would be like, Kaylee's one of the one thing Kaylee's really good at is speaking truth to power. I cannot, I have very, very, very low tolerance for, yeah, just not being truthful. I just can't, I cannot, I can't do it. I would rather be shunned socially than lie. I just cannot do it. I will not. I just don't see the point of being in this world if we're all just gonna lie. So even if it makes me unpopular, I'm just gonna tell the truth.
I absolutely love that
Yeah.
because I it is the most exhausting thing in the world to me to have to fake something.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of why I could not do a 9 to 5 because there's like
Hmm.
office politics always. And there's like, you're given like maybe 20 hours of work, but you have to be there 40. And like
Yeah.
there's so much there that it's just like you have to like put on a face or like
Yeah.
do it a certain way. And I like had a physical reaction to that.
Yeah.
Like actually like stress in my body could not hold it. And I've always felt like that is something that entrepreneurs share is because we have made this radical decision to like own our careers and own our
Hmm.
platforms. And so for us to like put something fake out there, like to put
Hmm.
everything on the line and be fake, it feels like it's such
Hmm.
a disservice. So I think that's like it's just critical. What what other values, like it sounds
Mhm.
like you have done like some work on like core values. Like what other values do you see as like through lines for yourself?
Yeah. Let me see. Honesty for sure. As you know, beauty as I really think there is something to beauty in the sense of like, okay, our environments, even a web page, as silly as it sounds, I'm like, if we can make something enjoyable, why not? So
Yeah.
even maybe in the sense of, I don't know, I've always, and I do explicitly sometimes write down like in a list, like what are my top values? And sometimes I go back and forth between like beauty and joy. I think maybe because to me they're almost the same thing. And I just feel like, you know, again, as far as I know, if this is the one life I get, might as well have a good time. If I'm gonna do
Yeah.
anything, might as well have a good time. And there's something I find that the women in my family, can't remember if anybody ever explained this like explicitly, but we just have this idea in our family of um oh, what is it? There's a saying, a motto, I think my aunt said it. Anyway, basically just that idea of like if you're gonna do anything, oh no, I can't remember. I'm sorry, this is like the worst. I can't remember the saying verbatim, but basically like, oh yeah, if you're not having a good time, like it's the only person you have to blame is yourself or something like that. Basically that idea of like, and actually Brendan Burchard talks about this, is like it's your responsibility to bring the joy. Like I think he literally has a bracelet that says like bring the joy. It's like it's your responsibility to make the best of whatever scenario you're in. Like if I'm not having a good time, like that's on me. Yeah.
That is like ultimate. There was a book that was going around called Extreme Ownership back in the
Yeah.
day, and I read it, and I think in some cases it's been misapplied, but this is how I've taken it is like you own your experience. Like you cannot control the environment that you're in necessarily. As entrepreneurs, we have more control, but we don't own that experience, but we own our experience. And so the way that we show up
Hmm.
and the deep work that you're doing, like all of that is so critical to us, like how we show up, because you and I both work with clients.
Yeah.
And so like I always think of the ripple effect. I always think of like I show up for this team, then this team shows up for this, then this, and then ultimately like the coaches that who we work for are have a large platform. So then it's like they're showing up differently. And those people, like I always go there and it starts with just one person being like, this is how I'm going to show up today. Um, and that has been an absolute game changer for me. I'm sure that you find that even in your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or whatever you're doing, where like there's days that you don't want to go, right? Or there's days that you feel like, this is not it.
Well, funny you mentioned that book, Extreme Ownership, because that was written by Jocko Willink, who is like a big jujitsu guy, actually. And so even to the extent that like, so back in the day when I first started jujitsu, I had started like a blog to talk about being a woman in jujitsu because back in the day, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, there literally were no like female jujitsu blogs. So I just made one. And then I started getting sent products and stuff. And I wouldn't say I was like an influencer, but whatever. And actually, so Jocko Willink's publishers like sent me some like advanced copies of, I can't remember if it was Extreme Ownership or a different book, but yeah, very much that, all that to say that like that mentality of like taking responsibility for yourself is very much part of the jujitsu world. Um, and I do actually think that's a huge component of being a really great leader in these online businesses that you and I have both worked in is, you know, what makes a team, what makes up a team that you actually want to work on? Like what makes for happy team members? I always think of it like if I'm a leader on a team, I take ownership of like, okay, if somebody messes up, what did I do that caused that? Did I not give them clear enough instructions? Did I not give them context? Like, did I not do their training well enough? Like what can I do to support the team? Like there are some people who I have seen some pretty high level people who I've seen blame their team, and I really don't like that. Because I'm like, girl, that just comes right back on you. Anyway, so yeah.
Yes, 100%. And I can attest to that because I've been on teams with you and I have completely dropped the ball on something and you've been like, "Oh, I wasn't clear about this." And then I have noticed that it is such a contagious attitude because I will then I like my instinct is to be like, "No, I missed that. You said it here." And that would likely be my instinct anyways, but as a like when you're working especially in a fast-paced environment, we don't always stop to say the thing that is the reality because we're like going so fast.
Mhm.
And I've noticed that on teams where there are people who have applied this mindset, every single person in if it's a Slack channel or whatever, every single person will just volunteer the part where it didn't they missed,
Mhm.
sometimes it's like all five people missed one thing and then it was collectively this thing.
Yeah.
And then it goes back to awareness then because you can't solve a problem until you know where it went wrong. And
Yeah.
that just comes from a leadership perspective of like being able to say, like, I'm sure that your coaches have that, like, if you are in an environment where you can say what went wrong, then
Mhm.
it just allows it to be solved so much faster.
Yeah, I would say like, are you the type of leader who makes your team feel safe? If they don't feel safe, they're not going to come to you and be like, "Hey, I messed up," or "Hey, I have feedback about the company," or "Hey, I'm seeing revenue leaks here." Like, you know what I mean? Like, if people don't feel safe coming to you and being honest with you, they're not going to. So I do really think that's truly one of the most important things you can do as a leader in online business is create a culture where people feel safe with you as the leader.
And it goes beyond your team too, because that is something that like as a coach then you're turning and doing to and allowing holding
Mhm.
space, like that has always felt fluffy to me, the term like holding space, but really it's like we all have our little tiny slice of the internet and it's like when you're in my slice of the internet, here is how we
Yeah,
interact, and that I
yeah.
guess is like the technical holding space. But if you have that space of like, I'm really struggling with this, or I'm like dealing with this, or I don't know if I responded to this. I'm in a group coaching program now and like we start with wins, but then at the end it's like we're still dealing with like, but I can't figure this out. And my coach gets excited. Like I said something the other day where I'm like, I'm really wrestling with this. And he stopped and was like, good, good. Like, I'm glad you said that because that means that you're almost there. And like
Mm,
that mentality is just so critical, I think, for everyone, but
yeah, that's
us.
awesome.
So you now have been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for how many years has it been?
A long time. I would say about 10 years, but keep in mind there was COVID in a lot of that where we
Mhm.
couldn't train.
Yeah.
10 years sounds impressive, but it wasn't actually 10 years.
And what has shifted for you now? Like your career is in a different spot than it was in,
Mhm.
10 years ago. What has shifted for you in terms of like prioritizing it? Like, has there been points where you were like less involved in it and then realized like this was actually helping me, like decompress and like got back to it? Or like what's been your journey with it, like kind of in relation to your career?
Yeah, so back when I started, I mean, and you see this with a lot of people who start jujitsu, I was obsessed. Like I told you, I started that blog. I became like a mini influencer in that jujitsu world. And I literally had it as um, conditions of contracts for people I was working with that I would not work evenings because I had to go to jujitsu. So it was a very big part of my life back in the day. I would say it's less so now just because I essentially accomplished what I wanted to do. I reached the belt level that I wanted. Um, and I traveled to Brazil a couple of times to train and like so I've hit the checklist that I wanted to. I would say there's just so many. It sounds so cliche and so trite, but there's just so many ways that it benefited me. And I will say, like, if you think of somebody like Anthony Bourdain, you would think that the most important thing in his life would have been like food or travel, but like he is on record as saying, like, quote, like the best thing, he considered jujitsu to be the best thing he ever did because it was the hardest thing he ever did. And it's so weird to a lot of people to hear that. Like, how can the hardest thing you do be the best thing? But it just forces you to learn so much about yourself. Like, I remember one time, one of my coaches, I told her, like, I told her, I'm like, oh, I think I can only do one round today. I don't know if I was like really tired or whatever, but I told her, I can only do one round, which is usually around like 5 or 6 minutes. And she's like, okay, one round. And she put the timer on, and I didn't even realize until like halfway through, but she put the timer on for this one round to be 30 minutes. So she was like tricking me but to show me like, okay, you think you're only capable of going 5 minutes, and I'm about to show you how you're going to go for 30. Like, just little life lessons like that. Um, even in life slash jujitsu, one of my goals, one of the things I was realizing was like, hey, I'm holding back a lot and I'm still kind of nervous. I'm not being as assertive as I would like to be. So I started judo. I added judo on because in the sport of judo, you have to be aggressive or you lose points. And so I've just found the utility of martial arts so good as a personal development tool because, like, yes, judo forces you to be aggressive because you will literally lose points if you're not seen to like being active. But it really does teach you about like, okay, where am I not being assertive enough in like, hey, asking this client why the invoice isn't paid, or saying the real price I want to charge, or having a tough conversation with a team member. Like, it's just, I truly think, maybe martial arts isn't for everyone, but they're probably, how you do anything is how you do everything. So if anybody's listening to this and you're like, okay, I want to, there's an area of my life that I know I want to work on, there's probably a sport or something you can be doing, some kind of hobby. Even if it's like, if it's patience, like start cooking, man, because you need patience. It's about timing and controlling the heat. So there's always some kind of hobby, even if it's not working out, there's always some kind of hobby that can teach you the thing you want to learn.
I think that's beautiful to say because as entrepreneurs, we often like are in a silo of our business and we think like if I need to improve something, we still stay within our business.
Yeah.
And I know, I had a panic attack doing a live training and like had to just stop, like I fully
Mm,
froze. And my instinct was like, okay, well, one, I just did not want to do another lot and I knew I had to.
mm,
And so I was thinking like, okay, how do I fight this within my business? Like I was still so here until one of my friends was like, you should just go do improv because it'll make you like
mm,
have to be in front of people often.
mhm,
And I did a 12-week improv class. I almost got sick to my stomach the first day, like pulled over on the side of the road, like, what am I doing? But it did, and it was outside of the like I had to go somewhere else. And that was like
mhm,
part of the inception of this podcast is like I just realized the power in like going somewhere else and developing a
mhm,
skill set. Our businesses are our entire lives as entrepreneurs. And so it's like a mindset shift to be like, we can get something from something else.
mhm,
But it's the only way that I have found. Um, and the thing that just made me think of that is like you were talking about your coach, how she set the 30-minute timer. Like that is the power of external, like that's the power of coaches in general, but that's the
mhm.
power of like an external person being like, I see where you are and I'm going to do something different for you.
Yeah, yeah. I do think that's like, again, I try to be careful because like, the I realize there's, the individualistic nature of saying like, I'm fully responsible for myself and I take extreme ownership and, uh, no one is coming. It's up to us. That's a big, like, I'll say mentality or saying that you hear a lot in like the jujitsu community. It's like, you have to be, the extreme individual and it's up to you. But I also think there's the other side of like, I do think we're better in community because to have like, again, the coach or the team members who are there, who can see stuff you can, who have the perspective you don't, and who truly want to help you develop and are there for you on those really bad days, because it's not always a good day. So I do think we have to be mindful of, yeah, the individualistic nature of some of these hobbies versus being in community, especially because like a lot of us work at home alone. And, you know, just as much as they say sitting is the new smoking, isolation is the new smoking. So like sometimes even just for your mental health, just get out there and be with other people is the best thing you can do. Even if you don't have a specific goal of like, I want to learn patience, I want to learn how to be more assertive. Sometimes you actually just need to be more in community, because I really do think at the end of the day, community is what will save us all.
I could not agree more. And it's I think it's both because like when I think about what is my responsibility, like I am only responsible for myself. I can only control myself. And I can use that to put myself in positions that allow me to be served by a community. Like
Hmm.
there are times where I don't feel like going to work out. There are times when I didn't feel like going to therapy. There are times, and I put myself in a position to be coached or
Mhm.
mentor or whatever. Like it's my responsibility to just show up sometimes
Mhm.
and sign up for the thing that I need to sign up for and trust that there is a community there and a person there that's going to help me. So it's like it's both. I think it just is like not, there's so many things that are kind of fluffy in the like online space. Like we hear like extreme ownership and it's like that means it's everyone's fault and we don't go deeper than that.
Mhm.
Or, you know, it's your own responsibility and we don't go deeper than that means isolation to people. But it's really creating space for yourself to go do the thing.
Yeah, and I think too, like people, you know, I don't want to say high achievers, but whatever, however, whatever label you want to use, I think one of the big lessons a lot of people who start out in coaching have to, I guess, grapple with is that idea when it comes to ownership of like, well, what if my clients don't get the result that I promised? Or what if, you know, to what extent should I basically try to force the outcome? To what extent should I like make sure that they succeed? And um, which I think very obviously ties into the question of like, are we responsible for ourselves? Are we responsible for the community? Like, what does that look like? And I found what really helped me contextualize that was understanding the like a boundary is really like, I am responsible to you. I am not responsible for you. That really, I think, made it click. I'm responsible for myself. And if you have kids, I obviously think like you're responsible. There are some people in your life that you might be responsible for. Like if you have a pet, you're obviously responsible for them. But when it comes to like human to human relations, what does it mean to like take extreme ownership, but also be in community? It's I am responsible to you. I'm not responsible for you. So like I'm responsible to you to be a good friend. I'm responsible to you to be a good team member. I'm not responsible for you.
Yes, I think that is such a differentiator that, especially as a new service provider, I had no concept of. Um, and I would, you know, put everything out on the line, and then they would, they would, you know, not fulfill something on their end, or a team member would leave or whatever, and I would take the entire ness
Hmm.
of it without being asked. Even it just was,
Hmm.
you know, my nature, and that created so many problems. I think something that I've noticed just in this conversation is you think so deeply about nuanced things. Like there, and I'm curious like where that comes from for you, if that's something that you cultivated or just have noticed that about yourself always.
I mean, I'm gonna bring it back to the Clifton Strengths test, which I do recommend. Like, it's a great test. You know, there was that phase where everybody was doing like the Myers-Briggs, and you know, they come in and out of fashion. But I do think the Clifton Strengths was really, really illuminating. Because the top, like my top four out of my top five were all to do with like intellection, context, like strategy. Like it's just I've just always been a very intellectual person, and that sounds weird, but I just really I like to think, I like to gather information, which is actually, if I may toot my own horn, is why I'm so good at helping people strategize how to get, where they want to go in their business. Because again, but this brings it back to self-awareness, is I know now that my strengths are in being able to see the larger picture, the fuller context. So it's very easy for me to see how somebody's business works as like an ecosystem and identify where the problems are. So if what levers can we pull that are going to make the biggest difference? That's just my natural strengths. That's just how I work. So I do think that self-awareness. So I would recommend, I'm no way affiliated with Clifton Strengths, but whatever, and some people may not like that, but whatever you got to do, like I work with a lot of really thoughtful people who have zero interest in like formal, personality tests like that, but they do spend a lot of time in journaling, spending time in nature, cultivating that self-awareness so they know how to best serve their community, really.
It is critical that we do that. And
Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing too is like how you have allowed this skill set that you learned about yourself
Mhm.
to flourish. Like sometimes we like work against our skill sets. Like we see there's a quote, I don't remember who it is, but there's a quote by someone who says like if your kid is lacking in math or failing math and wants to spend all of their time on the tennis court, get them a tennis coach instead of a math tutor.
Mhm.
And it's so opposite of like what we often do is like, okay, I'm good at this stuff, so I should go learn this stuff. Because we have this like mentality of being like a well-rounded person. And balance, is key in a lot of ways. Like we're talking about, working outside your business and stuff. But you have like found this spot where you know that you develop self-awareness, you know that you're a really great learner, you know that you're a deep thinker, you know that and you've made a career out of that. And I'm curious about the jump. You mentioned that you went to school for medicine, yeah?
Yeah, naturopathic medicine.
Okay. So tell me like the jump there because
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was where I started learning about marketing actually, because I was like, okay, I'm learning like dietetics, like nutrition and acupuncture and herbal medicine. But if you have to go start your own clinic, you have to also have customers. So I started learning about like, okay, if I'm going to start my own clinic, what does that look like? And I just fell in love, like rabbit hole to the max. I was just basically no longer interested as much in, like, I didn't want to spend all my days in a clinic doing acupuncture on people. I just didn't want to do that. And so just following my highest excitement of like, okay, I'm super passionate about marketing and I cannot get enough. So I would rather just do that. And it was really, really hard because I know, again, self-awareness, I've learned over the years that sunk cost fallacy is like my biggest thing that will hold me back. I'm so, I don't want to say like stubborn or loyal, but like I will tolerate a lot because I'm like, I've already put so much into it. Because we believe so many contradictory things in our society of like, well, you can't quit. Don't ever quit. Like we see that as bad, but then it's like, it's just, we have so many conflicting messages of like, yeah, just so I know of personality wise, like sunk cost is something I really struggle with. So it was really, really hard for me to let go of like, years and thousands of dollars like sunk into naturopathic medicine, but I'm like, I just don't want to be miserable for the rest of my life. So I'm gonna go this other way. But I also think there's a couple things that come to mind that I actually think are really, really important. So as I was making the shift from naturopathic medicine to marketing, I spent 9 months volunteering in California. And for context, to listeners, I'm Canadian, but I spent 9 months volunteering in California. And I do think, I mean, there's a lot of cultural differences between Canadians and Americans. And I will say, Americans taught me how to be unapologetic. Americans are the most unapologetic people. I got cornered so many times from people being like, you don't apologize for having an opinion. Because a very Canadian thing is like, I'm the queen of disclaimers. I will start like, oh, this is just how I feel, but what do I know? And it's just a very Canadian thing. Like, you know, oh, I don't know. I don't want to offend anyone, but Americans are super unapologetic. And like, so I would say that that's one thing of like, it's one thing to be self-aware, but it's another thing to be unapologetic about who you really are. Like, so I would say that's a big one, is like, you may know deep down what you are meant for or what you're good at or what you want. It's another thing to actually trust yourself and stand up for yourself and be unapologetic about it. And secondly, kind of in that vein, is I've also learned a lot from the disability community, because you know, it's really about our tolerance as a society for difference. And like, okay, if you do have team members who have generalized anxiety disorder, or who do who are autistic or do have ADHD, or just whatever, any kind of difference, it's the disability world is the best place I've ever seen for understanding how we think about difference and being unapologetic and saying like, okay, I might be different than the quote unquote ideal in some way, but you're not going to shame me for it, and I'm going to take up space unapologetically. So I just think I think a really, really interesting place to put our attention. And I think the place that makes us all better is by listening to folks with disabilities and different ways of being in the world.
Absolutely. And I'm curious if you're okay sharing this, where you mentioned that you're autistic, where that diagnosis came in your journey, because I have close friends. I've worked with kids who had autism for a long time. I have a close friend, and something that I've seen as a common thread is that when that diagnosis happens, there's so much retroactive self-awareness, and then in going forward as well. So I'm curious where that happened for you, if you're comfortable sharing that.
Yeah. So it's been actually relatively recently, like just about a year ago, and it's been one of the best things because it makes you realize, oh, I do make sense. I didn't understand how, but now, okay, a lot of things are making sense. And in understanding and accepting why I'm so strategic and why my brain works differently than other people. So sometimes it's hard when people are like, oh, because in a lot of the businesses I work in, I'll do things in a very like detailed way or in a certain way. Business owners will ask me, oh, Kaeli, how do I teach my team to think like that? And I just want to be like, I don't know that you can. I just, how do you teach people to be more autistic? I don't know. I don't know. But, so to be determined. But I would say appreciating it as maybe an unfair advantage of like, I did have like a day where I was terrified and I'm like, does this mean I am doomed? Because, if you listen to people, oh, you're disabled, or, oh, you're autistic, you think it's like, oh, you must be dumb. And I'm like, well, actually, I'm not. And like statistically, you actually have higher intelligence or even just a different way of thinking. I'm like, you know what? This isn't bad. I'm just going to lean into my strengths. Again, self-awareness. I'm just going to lean into my strengths and make the magic happen that I know I can. And it's just been a really, really cool journey. Again, kind of forcing me to learn more about the disability world. And it's just been really enlightening to see how our society really does have a very low tolerance for difference. And I really, truly believe that the next like frontier is going to be a larger acceptance of difference. And I think it'll be freeing for everyone, because here's the thing. There are a lot of neurospicy people who have not yet realized they're neurospicy. I didn't know for most of my life, right? Like, so there are people walking around trying to conform to a very specific quote unquote ideal. And it's not, I don't think it's helpful to most people. I do think it is, as you mentioned, like, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to live its whole life thinking it's stupid. And it's like, put the fish back in the water. Like, somebody listening to this might be the fish trying to climb the tree.
It is such I do see this happening, what you're talking about. And I grew up, I was homeschooled. And so my interests and stuff were nurtured in a way that would not have been probably in a public school system, just from you're kind of catering to the masses. And um, I forget what Myron Golden calls schools, but he basically is like juvenile, like it's just, they're training kids to be employees. And I don't think it is a bad thing to be an employee. I think, everyone
Yeah.
has their superpower, and that's great. But we typically cater to um, mass confirmation, like just making everyone understand, this is the hierarchy of a corporate system. This is the way that and the more that we're kind of coming away, I think, from traditional school, even like Montessori schools are like a lot more popular now, and understanding learning styles is like more popularized now. Like we are seeing people every homeschooler I know right now is an entrepreneur. Like we're seeing people be a little more nurtured to be an individual. And I think that is only going to continue because we need people running their own businesses. I think small businesses are the backbone of like what we do. So I see the trend that you're talking about.
Yeah. And it's really, again, I could go down one of my rabbit holes, but I think actually schooling is a really, really interesting topic. I actually went to teachers college and I dropped out because I was like, I can't be part of because it's wild, because you will be in teachers college and you will literally see studies of like how this doesn't work. Like they know this like format of having 30 kids in a row in a classroom staring at the sage on the stage. They know that doesn't work. There's literal studies, like they've known this, but it's such a large system. And again, I'm not anti-school. Again, I love learning. I realized in teachers college that learning and schooling are not the same thing. So I'm not anti-school, but we have to realize learning and schooling are not the same thing. But again, this is like such a larger conversation, because if you think about, okay, so follow that line, why do we have like, liberal education, but we have like, it's a liberal arts education, like that idea of you learn a little bit about many things. Why do we have that? It's because it's actually a Greek idea, because democracy is also a Greek idea. The idea is that, this is why it's a larger conversation, because in order to have a democracy, you need a population that is sufficiently educated in order to be able to make decisions about society as a whole. So you need to understand actually how the larger society works in order to be able to vote in a democracy. So anyway, that is a whole conversation itself of like, okay, well, how do we then run society and educate society so that we can actually have a democracy? So I think that's a whole other, if you can solve that schooling problem, Brittany, like, please do.
It's wild to me. I mean, I have a stepson now who's in a public school system, and we see, he has a class that he was able to opt out of PE for, that's called esports, and they play
Oh,
video
wow.
games.
Oh my God.
That's it. And it is a substitute for PE.
Amazing.
And I mean, I it's not my place. It's shocking to me that is a public school. It's one of the largest public schools in Orlando. And I am floored at what we are allowing to happen to our kids. It's so wild to me. And I am just so thankful for the presence of coaches. Like you just mentioned, learning and schooling, so different. I have a degree here from a college that I went to school at, and I can confidently say that in my first marketing course from Julie Chanel, shout out to Julie Chanel, I learned more about marketing because she had distilled all of her knowledge, her real world experience, and put it into, she had some like course in this whole learning path. And I learned so much about marketing that I did not learn in school. So there's so many nuances there. I know we can't go into all of it, but yes.
Yeah, shout out to Julie, because that was also my first course. When I was like, okay, I need to do something else. She was my first marketing course. So shout out to Julie.
She was like my gateway drug to this whole thing. I had no
Yeah.
idea about the internet marketing world at all. And I found her right before the Expert Secrets affiliate contest with Russell.
Hmm.
And I was like, what world did I just fall into? I don't understand what's happening here.
Yeah. Well, I think it was so, I still remember, I think it might still be the intro to her podcast, which is like, working from home is the greener. That's the one part I remember, the greener option. I was like, oh, that's actually super interesting. And I just find, like, talk about prophetic, like years later, it's so true. It really is. And I mean, that course saved me during like COVID. I was so ready for COVID, like for the lockdowns. Like I thrived during the lockdowns because I worked from home. Like I did great. I thrived. And I'm just so grateful that she had, and there are brilliant people like that who have that foresight, and who are trailblazers. So yeah, again, shout out to Julie.
Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. This was so enlightening in so many ways. I think we hopefully have inspired some people to go do something outside of their office. And martial arts could be a great option. I know my dad is a black belt in karate, and um, even on his busiest days has made time for it because, not to speak for him, but it just seems to really be an outlet in a way that he has a community. And um, he just has that winner's mentality that you're talking about, that is like you either win or learn, and that's a win-win essentially. So hopefully we have inspired some people to do that.
Yeah, and you know what? It's really cool too. I will say, stepping on the mats is one of the, I don't want to say last places. I don't want to get super bleak, but it is really cool. Like you will be on the mats, and I have been on the mats with, when I tell you like the range of types of people, like with university professors and people who just got out of jail and like millionaires and like somebody who's trying to get sober. When I tell you, it's the most interesting group of people when you step on the mats. I just think it's one of the truly last places where you do have such a mishmash of people coming together, because you don't, when you start training with somebody on the mats, like you don't ask them, oh, what's your job? You're all in the gi. You don't know, like you're all in the gi. And still to this day, I see like the recovering drug addict will have like a brown belt, and then the millionaire business owner will have a white belt, and they have to humble themselves, put themselves at the end of the line and learn from the guy who just got out of jail. And it's really cool. It's really cool to see. You don't really see that kind of mingling a lot of other places. So yeah, just the community you get. But again, people like taking away, you know what, if martial arts isn't for you, as we've talked about, self-awareness, do whatever, let's we can channel Marie Kondo, whatever sparks joy, follow it, and take your cues from the disability community and be like, hey, what, advocate for yourself in terms of, what you actually want and what actually works for you, and celebrate your own difference. And yeah, just like Julie, you can maybe be a trailblazer for someone else. So you never know. It's never just you. Again, they say like by you shining your light, you're just like you, Brittany, shining your light and being honest about, your anxiety is what allows me to be like, hey, I'm autistic, world. So everybody just, being willing to be honest and self-aware is just the most beautiful thing ever, I think.
100% agree. Yes. Where can people find you? They're resonating with your message. I can feel it. I'm positive. Where can people find you?
Yeah, if you hold the values of honesty, and community, and you really do have hope for this world, KaeliSweigard.com, KaeliSweigard.com, or you can find me on Instagram. That would be great.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brittany.